Hi, welcome to another edition of South Bridge Street Live. I am so excited to introduce my next guest, Sue Prudhomme from the Museum of the Coastal Bend. And I had the fun adventure today of shooting my first live, preview for my interview tonight, and got a chance to visit with you, and we got to talk about jewelry just a little bit, historical jewelry. But we were deciding where should we start. And I said, let's start at the very beginning. And what did you say? 'Cause it was
awesome. 13,000 years ago?
We're not going to start from there.
But that's a fun place to start.
Well, it would be a fun place to start. We've got just 40 minutes, though.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yes, we'll have to break it down.
Maybe a little more recent?
Yes, just a little bit more recent, like in the last 300 years, 400 years.
Okay, so about 3/4 of the Museum of the Coastal Bend covers the last 300 years. The remaining quarter covers that 13,000 years ago that we're not going to talk about tonight.
Does it involve jewelry of any kind?
It could involve jewelry.
Right. Yeah, jewelry became a big subject.
Yeah, the prehistoric people that lived in this area, they didn't just live that life of subsistence that some people think that they did. They actually had time to make decorative items for, we think, for their body.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, so that part that we're not going to talk about tonight, it's really fascinating and maybe a great story for another time.
For another time?
Yeah.
All right, deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so your focus at the Museum of the Coastal Bend. Well, talking about the beginning. When the Museum of the Coastal Bend, I guess, came together, tell me about that part, how you brought the Museum of the Coastal Bend together and why the focus was on LaSalle.
Okay, so the mission of the museum is to enhance an appreciation for the heritage of the Coastal Bend region of Texas.
Okay. Which includes?
Right, that's the very first question that we normally get from people is, what's the Coastal Bend? So the Coastal Bend is roughly that area in the east from Galveston, stretching along the coast of Texas to Corpus Christi, and then about 50 miles inland. Okay. So that's what we define as the Coastal Bend of Texas. So in 1995, the Texas Historical Commission located one of the French explorer LaSalle's ships, the La Belle, in Matagorda Bay. And it was a huge excavation, cost many millions of dollars.
So La Belle first?
La Belle was excavated first.
Okay. I didn't realize that.
In 1996. So, thousands of people poured into Texas to view that excavation and to learn about LaSalle. We always knew that ship was out there in Matagorda Bay.
Wait, you switched LaSalle or La Belle?
La Belle.
La Belle. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So we always knew that the La Belle was out there in Matagorda Bay, and we knew LaSalle's colony was somewhere in South Texas.
Right.
But the ship was under 12 feet of water, hard to find, and
really 12 feet.
12 feet.
Hard to find.
About 12 feet of water.
Because you said
because
earlier.
It's Matagorda Bay.
Because it's Matagorda Bay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, it's murky. There's a lot of stuff under there. But, so they did manage to locate the ship, and they excavated it. They did essentially a dry land excavation, which was accomplished by making what was called a cofferdam in Matagorda Bay. Imagine an inside-out swimming pool.
Okay.
So they built steel walls around the shipwreck, and then they pumped the water out.
I've seen that, yes.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really an amazing undertaking, financially, scientifically, but it enabled them to do a dry land excavation instead of an underwater archaeological excavation. So when they did that, interest, of course, kind of quickened in the whole LaSalle, La Belle story. And around the same time, on the Curran Ranch in southern Victoria County, the cannons that were at LaSalle's colony were discovered.
How were they discovered?
There are a couple of different stories about how people might have known the location earlier than was actually reported.
Right.
But the foreman of the ranch was using a metal detector for other purposes.
Just for fun?
Yeah. Well, I think he was trying to locate some metal pieces for ranch purposes, for what they were doing out there on the ranch. And he got a really huge reading. And so did a little bit of digging, and there were
like a metal detector, like
a metal detector,
like a standard grade, like not a.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like a regular everyday metal detector.
So the cannons were unearthed shortly after the labelle was excavated.
By coincidence.
Somewhat.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
That's how the story goes. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Gotcha.
And
That's fun.
And so, and you can read into that whatever you want, but it happened around the same time.
Cool.
And so the cannons were excavated, and that enabled historians and researchers to identify that this is the location of LaSalle's colony, Fort St. Louis. So
just by where the cannons
were located, because we had the historical documents from the Spanish expedition that recovered those cannons.
Yes.
And then buried those cannons. So we had their documents. We knew from their recordings that the colony was very close to where the Spanish had buried those cannons.
So when they documented, they didn't put like an X and then like draw for you.
They did.
Sorry, that's.
But imagine. Okay, so the Spanish found those cannons in 1689. They came back in 1721. How many hurricanes happened? What happened in that environment that changed that landscape, that visual landscape? Trees were no longer there. Water might have changed course. I mean, there's just so many things that could have happened in those 30 years. So, the Spanish came back in 1721 to find the cannons and to build their presidio on the location of Fort St. Louis. And how embarrassing it must have been to not be able to find those cannons that they had buried.
Because they didn't have metal detectors.
And carefully marked, yes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that whole series of events of finding the labelle, finding the cannons, excavating the Fort St. Louis colony, that precipitated the Museum of the Coastal Bend being founded. So that was a really long answer to your question.
No, but I loved it, every minute of it. So seriously, because now I want to ask you this, because I'm just getting into history and had said that this is the thing that fascinates me. So if LaSalle was here in Victoria, right, and he had this colony,
right?
So how does that relate to Martin de Leon? Because isn't he like the founding father, like flag in the sand?
Yes.
Founder.
Yes, he received the charter from Mexico.
Okay.
To found the colony that then became Victoria.
Right.
LaSalle's colony failed, and it was in a different location. So two different explorer types of guys.
But LaSalle's first.
LaSalle was first.
Okay. All right. I just was curious about that because I didn't know if this was at the same time, if they were, one was coming from the sea. Well, I guess they both were. No, Martin de Leon.
De Leon came from Mexico. Yeah, from Mexico overland. Okay. But yeah, they were separated by 1684 to 1830.
Okay.
So 150
not
plus
not
years.
excluding Martin de Leon as the founding father. I just meant that whole flag in the sand thing. Yeah. Where were we?
I would say de Leon is the father of Victoria as we know it today.
For sure.
Definitely. Yeah. LaSalle tried and failed to found a French colony.
Right.
he didn't want, his purposes were not to found it in what would become known as Texas. He was actually shooting for the mouth of the Mississippi River. He missed. Yeah.
Again, those X's on the maps and metal detectors. Enough cannot be said about.
Yeah, not enough can be said about maps and Google Maps. And
so by the and the whole Google Maps.
Yeah.
So why was his expedition then considered a failure? Why, or the colonies? It just they died off. Was he?
Yeah.
He was so far from where he needed to be.
So we think that he was so far off course because his navigational instruments, when he started out in Canada and sailed down the mouth of the Mississippi River, we think that his navigational instruments were at that time were slightly off. He got the latitude right. He got the longitude wrong.
Okay.
So when he went back up the Mississippi into Canada and then went back over to France and persuaded King Louis, hey, that would be a great location for a French colony. He had his measurements from when he came down the Mississippi. He marked the spot.
Right.
But because we think his longitudinal measurements were incorrect, when he came back, he ended up at almost the right latitude, but he was off longitudinally, if that's a word.
Like directionally challenged.
Yeah.
His Ingra expedition.
Yeah, and so we call it a failure. If it were a movie, it would kind of be a comedy of errors, a very tragic comedy of errors. He came over he started out with 4 boats. He was supposed to start out with 3. The Belle was a kit that he was going to build whenever he got to Texas.
So the Belle was a kit?
It was.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it had a very shallow draft. It was designed for freshwater exploration.
Right.
It wasn't designed for an ocean crossing, but he did. Successfully crossed the Atlantic Ocean.
Which was a success.
Yes.
Okay.
He did lose one of his boats along the way to pirates when he got to the Caribbean. Then when he reached Matagorda Bay, that he thought was the Mississippi, he lost another of the boats in a shallow channel trying to get into Matagorda Bay. So then he was down to 2 boats, the Jolie and the Belle. The Jolie never intended to stay. And one of the things you have to remember is that when you lose a boat, you lose everything on it.
Right.
All your supplies for this colony. They're slowly dwindling as we lose our boats.
So they really just end up with 1 boat and a kit.
Yeah. And the boat, the Jolie, never intended to stay. It was supposed to sail back to France. It had the soldiers on it. And so they got him to what they thought was the Mississippi River, and then they said adios. They might not have said adios. They might have said bonjour.
Bonjour.
Yes.
Yes.
Or
wait,
au
what's
revoir.
Au revoir. Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Au revoir.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they went back to France. So he's left with 1 ship, the Belle. And the Belle is their only way out of Texas if they need to get back to France. And it took a couple of years, but the Belle also wrecked, as we now know. Yeah. Yeah. So he was left without any ships, with hardly no supplies, with a small population of people who wanted to be colonists, who were ill prepared to be colonists, who did not expect the hostile environment.
Right, I was going to say, at any point in time when he was traveling the Mississippi, were there any Indians along the way that they, because I'm assuming when you say hostile, what are we talking about?
We're talking about the native population,
right,
but we're
the
also
weather.
the weather. We're talking about the flora and the fauna.
Yep.
we're talking about the topography,
Right.
just everything in that environment that they encountered. They were not prepared for that environment, and so the colonists slowly dwindled in number. Yeah. So finally, LaSalle decided to try to walk out of Texas to Canada. And so he took about 17 men with him. They, along the way, decided that they'd had enough of LaSalle and they murdered him. Meanwhile, there were, maybe between 20 and 30 people left at the fort, the people who weren't well enough to travel to try to walk out
they
of
were
Texas.
just, it wasn't like they just said, no, we're going to stay here and we're going to make the best of it. They just weren't well?
Most
much.
of them weren't well, yeah.
Wow.
And they were overrun by the Karankawa. So there were 5 children that survived and were adopted by the local tribe. But the rest of them...
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I read something several years ago that I thought was very interesting, which was about when Indians would adopt children. That, and I know that there are horror stories, but that I read a couple of memoirs of children that were adopted that said that they loved it because they had been working so hard for so many years, and that the Indian culture was much more lax. Children played, they were nurtured differently. Have you ever heard of anything like that, or do you know?
I know it
what
must
I'm
have been
talking
an
about?
entirely different lifestyle
Right.
from what they were used to. You know, the traditions are different.
That's the ones that I read were treated very well, and it was sort of like a relief of this hardship existence, whereas Indians were, like, they were good with teaching them things, but that they could run around and just be.
Yeah, I can see where there could be many.
Now, I don't know if that was the Karankawas.
Right.
I don't remember that,
Right.
but I just thought that that was an interesting sort
Yeah.
of fresh perspective that I had read
Yeah.
that I thought.
You know, and I'm sure that every experience was different for
Sure.
any child that was
They took the
integrated
5
into
children,
the
they didn't
society.
murder the children.
Right.
Okay.
There was a baby that was murdered. Yes. And there aren't really any recounts.
Something tells me maybe these 5 children didn't write good memoirs about their experiences.
They were really young when it happened, so it's possible that they didn't really have great memories of it. So those children were integrated into the Karankawa tribes. They were tattooed. They spoke fluent Karankawa and other local dialects. But they were eventually rescued by the Spanish. And so some of them went on to work for the Spanish in various capacities as they continued to try to explore North America. Yeah, it's the Talon children, and really a fascinating part of the story.
Talon?
The Talon children. Yeah. And so one of the children was, one of the first, I think actually maybe 2 or 3 of the children were born on Texas soil. So, they were like the first European American citizens.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah.
What is if you had one story in the LaSalle adventure that you find most fascinating, a side story, feet to the fire, what story would that be?
Oh gosh. So I really, I think it's a great lesson for all of us when one of the stories of LaSalle and his very first encounters with the local tribe that we now know as the Karankawa. LaSalle arrived in Texas, and they were desperate for supplies and modes of transportation. And when he encountered the local people, the very first thing that he did was to steal some of their canoes.
Wow.
which set the tone for the entire relationship between the French and the Karankawa. And, just also was kind of a, I don't know, foreshadowing of the entire story. I think first impressions are everything.
Yeah. It'd probably be really smart not to steal from the locals. Yeah.
Right.
Get them riled up.
Right. When you're alone on Mars, don't steal from the aliens.
Gotcha. Do you believe in aliens?
I believe in all possibilities.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so what about some of the most interesting artifacts that were pulled from?
So the labelle yielded some really fascinating artifacts. Some personal items that belonged to the colonists, forks and spoons and platters and ceramic pieces, but also the ship had, it was kind of a colony kit. It had barrels and barrels of metal axe heads and trade beads, things that, as somebody in France who's preparing for their voyage, and they realize that there are going to be people there already living who we're going to need to trade with them for survival. Trade being the operative word, not steal.
Yeah.
It just these large quantities of goods that the French thought
I can think about how desperate he must have been. I mean, I'm not advocating what he's done, but I just think that's a desperate man. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, you're right. He was.
There's some sympathy there for a journey that's not gone well.
He had lost 2 boats. The other one had departed.
Which you said had the things that maybe he could have traded with them. So trade beads and these.
Right. Well, the labelle wasn't lost until about 2 years into the founding of the colony. So he had those items that he could have traded for the canoes.
Wait a minute. So then really he was really just a jerk.
In the historical journals of the whole expedition, LaSalle does come off as a bit of a jerk. But then you look at it from the position of the leader of all these people, and I'm responsible for these people, and sometimes you have to make those hard decisions.
Sure.
So I'm not, it's really difficult to tell. Was he a jerk? Was he just not making really good decisions? Or was he trying to make the best decision he could in the situation for the long term? What was going on in LaSalle's mind? And
that is something else that someone has said before too that I thought was very interesting, which is we judge history without really putting ourselves in at that time.
Right.
Because we've got this perspective now of what that's, of this situation. So it's easier to look at it and make judgment calls, but you weren't there, you weren't in it. And I think that was something really interesting, something to learn about how we judge history over time.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. And, it's like when you look at a piece of art, you bring your experiences and your past to the viewing of that piece of art.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Of all of the artifacts that are in this collection that is housed at the Museum of the Coastal Bend, Feet to the Fire, what is your favorite artifact?
So there's an artifact that was misidentified when it was first taken off of the labelle. It's a big iron cylindrical piece that was first identified as some sort of smelting device for metal. And then after years of research, it was identified as a petard.
A petard.
A petard. There's a famous line in Shakespeare's, I think it's Hamlet, where they're talking about a character who's being hoisted on his own petard. So a petard is a bomb. And a petard is used, you know, imagine a really tall, empty vase with really thick walls. You put incendiary items in there, and then you hold it up against a wall or a door of a fort, and you light it, and it goes boom, and the wall disintegrates.
Wow.
So I think it's a really fascinating story of how scientists can misidentify pieces. So, you know, how many other pieces, how many other items throughout history have been misidentified and the story has not been completely told because of that misidentification? In this case, when you think that it's something to melt metals, that's an entirely different story than it's a bomb.
Right.
What were they going to blow up with those bombs? What did they anticipate encountering that they would need a bomb?
Oh, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes my whole comment about the jewelry, the rings, seem really trite.
No, I don't think there's anything trite about any of the artifacts in this whole story, or that are resulted from this whole story, because each one is fascinating.
Sure. And the rings are fascinating to me because of the craftsmanship, because the primitive, but yet incredibly beautiful.
Now, those would have been used as rewards
Really?
for when the natives would have converted or learned certain pieces in Christianity.
Right.
The rings would have been used as a reward for learning more.
Would that be like a cross necklace, like the extension of a necklace? Was it a way to identify you? It's, so I understand it's a reward, but to also so that you were marked as a Christian?
Potentially. Yeah, that's a great thought. So tonight I'm wearing one of our pieces of jewelry. It's a...
Like you took it out of the artifact?
I wish I could.
Because I clearly put on my Facebook Live that it says responsible, what was it?
Responsible collecting. Yes, which we very much encourage. No, this is a replica in silver of one of the religious medallions
that were found.
That was found.
Do you sell those at the?
We do.
I
sell them
missed
in
that
our
part.
gift shop.
I should have asked about it instead of trying to steal it out of the box. The whole thing. There's like 8 rings. There's beautiful.
Yeah. We've replicated quite a few of the items of jewelry.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm going to come back to the gift shop with that. I need to look at it for a second time. I didn't even think about inquiring, and it is beautiful. And what is it?
So it's Mary and Jesus.
Oh my gosh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And I feel like I'm always carrying around a little piece of the Museum of the Coastal Bend.
Oh, that's neat.
And some of the history
How
of
long
this
have you
area.
been at the Museum of the Coastal Bend?
10 years, since
Wow.
2007.
Oh, wow, that's so awesome.
I
What did you
know.
do before that?
I was a director of an art museum in Monroe, Louisiana.
Oh, really? Are you Cajun?
I am Cajun.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have really good Boudreaux and Thibodeau jokes, but I can't tell them on
Should
the
we
air,
tell
but
them
later.
tonight?
Yes, I can do those voices too.
Yeah.
Not just Mickey Mouse. I'm not just a one voice circus, no. And then there's one word that I can never get right, and we were talking about the like the mishistory, which is the arrowheads. So I was reading on one of those boards. It says, oftentimes you'll pick it up and you'll go, oh, it's an arrowhead, and it's not, and it belongs on the
atlatl.
Atlatl?
Atlatl or atlatl.
These are all correct?
Yeah, we don't know how it was pronounced.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome for me.
Yeah, we don't really know how it was spelled.
So give me some of the choices.
Atlatl.
Atlatl.
Atl.
Atlatl. That's what I was saying, and I was like, I know that's wrong.
Atlatl.
Atlatl.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And these were the spears.
So the atlatl is the tool that's used to throw a light spear.
Okay. Oh, I see.
Yeah. So essentially, it was used in prehistoric times, and it is a short stick that basically, I should have brought one tonight. When you hold it in your hand, it extends your arm, and I've got really short arms, so I need some extension. So you gain an elbow, so I've got one elbow here, and then this becomes an elbow because I'm holding this stick. So I gain an elbow, and I gain length, so I can throw my spear with more force, and I can hit my target with more impact energy than if I just threw that spear by hand alone, because my arm only has one elbow and it's short. But I gained an elbow and I made it longer whenever I used the atlatl to throw my spear.
And one of the things that the Museum of the Coastal Bend does on occasion is actually give courses, right?
Yes.
To do that. So tell me about what are some of the other, tell me about what's coming up in the summer. Tell me about some of the other cool classes that you guys do, and lectures and stuff that are coming.
Great. So this summer we're concentrating on kids. So we've got several kids camps that are happening. We've got some that are specifically tailored for Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts.
Right.
And then for the general public, we have our History Explorers camp. So the kids will just be exploring all aspects of history, doing some interactive hands-on sort of activities, learning how to throw a spear with an atlatl, and just learning about to appreciate the history and heritage of our region. The Boy Scouts actually get to go out to one of the archaeological sites and
do we have
see
archaeological sites going on now? I mean, are there digs going on now?
Yeah.
How do you get on a dig?
So first you have to learn how to dig. You have to learn how to be a responsible collector. Yes. Anything that's found on your property, you own it.
Yeah.
Anything that's found on someone else's property, they own it.
Gotcha.
Anything that's found on public lands belongs to the state.
Right.
So there are only 3 options in Texas.
So what digs are around here?
So the dig site that we go out to most often is the McNeil Ranch site. It's VT 141, which means that it's the 141st site that was recorded in Victoria County.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the numbers only progress from there. So
when you say you have to know how to dig, do you have to have like an archaeological degree?
You do not have to have an archaeological degree, but you need to learn the basic procedures in excavating and recording, because the artifacts they have no value unless you know in what surroundings they were found. What was the context around them? How far down in the soil were they found? What was the color of the soil? What was the composition of the soil? What artifacts were found around them? And was there other evidence of occupation by man around that artifact?
And children in this discovery camp, they'll learn how to do some of that?
We teach them the basics.
How old is the oldest person that can be in the camp?
Well,
45?
The camp is for children, but throughout the year we offer information to the public. We offer training and invite people to join our volunteer archaeological team, the Coastal Bend Archaeological Logistics team.
That's something that I think that I would enjoy.
Yeah, I think you would too.
Cool. I mean, are there cameras around? I'm just
No,
joking.
but you could bring cameras.
No, I mean security cameras.
Oh, there's plenty of security cameras.
Okay, good. I figured as much. And so tell me about this brick. Did you guys unearth this? You gotta.
And, we actually made this brick. So we have a new exhibit at the museum.
Yes.
It's the 2-scale outline of the LaBelle
That was
ship.
awesome.
It
today.
is.
That's very
really
cool.
awesome. Yes.
It's so small.
It was a small ship. Imagine crossing the Atlantic Ocean in that.
I know. That's what I mean. I was
Yeah.
like, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah. It would not have been a pleasant experience.
No, it
not.
could be why he was murdered.
Yeah. So, we realized when we installed that exhibit, it's in the ground,
Right.
in that area approaching the museum outside. It's in a really shady spot. So we realized that, if a lot of school students come into this area and it's been raining, this is not going to be a good experience. It's going to be muddy and gross. So we decided to surround the outline of the ship with pavers.
Cool.
And then we decided to use it as a fundraising campaign because, we're nonprofit.
Yes.
And the only way that we can afford to fund our exhibits, our collections, and our educational programs is through community support. So anyone can purchase a paver and get their name or their message engraved on that paver, and then it will be permanently installed around the outline of the bell.
How much are the pavers?
So this is our small size. It's the 4x8 and it's $75. And then we have a double size 8x8 and it's $150.
Well, cool.
Yeah, and it's a permanent memorial.
I could maybe buy one and put, I promise, all joking aside, I will be a responsible collector.
Yes.
And people will know.
I would love that. Yes.
That
yes.
would be awesome.
I would love to get a promise from everybody that they'll be a responsible collector.
I would hope so. I mean, all joking aside, I would hope so. So anyway, and then so where can we find out information about the camps and anything else? What was your
Visit our
best-
website, museumofthecoastalbend.org. Our lectures are through for the spring.
Right.
But we've got a whole slate of them lined up for the fall that I'm about to publish that schedule and those lectures.
Cool.
It's the John W. Stormont lecture series. They're free
wonderful.
and open to the public because of that sponsorship.
Yep. And I'll know to get those for you to put in the magazine.
Yes.
So that'll be awesome.
Yes, I'd
Cool.
appreciate that.
Well, this
Yeah.
has been awesome. Thank you
this
so
has
much.
been great.
Well, okay, so speaking of the magazine and things that are going on, I wanted to be sure before I let you go that we talk about some of the events coming up. We've got on May 28th, the first home game for the Victoria Generals. We've got Crossroads Community Band on May 29th. June 1st, this is a big one, is Dancing with the Stars Victoria Style, benefiting Billy T. Catan Recovery Center. That's going to be awesome. One of my girlfriends is dancing in that. It's just been an incredible journey for her. Let's see, Pickers Patch is coming up, Victoria Theater Summer Camp, and then you and I were discussing this. It's
The Victoria Bach Festival.
yes, exactly. The Victoria Bach Festival starting June 6th, and I think that's through the 10th, June 10th. So those are some of the
yes.
events coming up. And then what is the next thing for you guys? You said the summer camps. Do you know what the date?
So they start June 7th, I believe, and they go all through the summer.
Perfect.
And then September the 7th at the museum, we're opening our new temporary exhibit. It's called Sunken History, and we're examining more shipwrecks.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you very much for coming
Thank
and visiting
you.
me.
I really
And
appreciate
thank you
it.
with all of my heart for being a part of South Bridge Street Live and taking the time to find out more about our community.